listening to It's Killing Me, where I, comedian Shane Kenny, unpack the history of mental health and all the things that impact it. Today, I'm joined by a guest I am so honored to have on here, Arthur Kennedy.
Hi, everybody. Nice to be here in Shane's relatively new crib.
Arthur is a phenomenal musician, poet, and person, and we're going to learn about his trials and tribulations, and we are so lucky and grateful to have him here. Anything I forget? Anything you want to promote or share?
No. Yeah, I think you captured it.
And if I'm not mistaken, didn't Palms Up Academy help produce a wonderful film about you?
Yes. Duo Decennial. It was a short film of a poem I wrote for my 60th birthday. Originally, I planned to throw a party and present this poem, but then COVID hit, and so I turned 60 in 2020. So everything shut down, and in talking to people about it, it was kind of suggested, well, why don't we do a film? And I was like, I don't know how to do that. And so I basically gave that up to the universe, and people came together and made it happen. So it was a wonderful experience. First time I've ever been in a film or made a film, and especially one that was all about me. So great experience. Really appreciate the Palms Up Academy, the participants, and the people who who just dove in and made that happen. So I never in a million years would have thought that would happen. Not on my bucket list, but it's there.
It was a wonderful film, heartwarming, inspiring, and very informative. It was wisdom and lessons I feel like we can take away a lot from, given the challenges we face today. And I think that's the beauty of Palms Up. Their motto is "You shine, I shine." And it's so wonderful having creative and talented people who you can say, hey, do what you do.
Yeah.
And they can carry it from there. And I think you've inspired so many of us in Palms Up and in that community and the people that have come in and out of it, that it was only natural that we would want to show the world this wonderful person and their stories that we are privileged enough to see week in and week out.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah, being on a podcast is yet another unique experience. Never done this before. So thank you for another new thing to put on my list of things I did not plan to do, but did.
So why don't you share with us, where did you grow up?
Born and raised here in Los Angeles. I was born in Pasadena, California, at Huntington Memorial Hospital at 6:18 a.m. I don't know why I always remember that time. Predominantly grew up in Alta Dena. So, and the recent fires burned down the house that I grew up in. Houses. I mean, my parents lived in 3 different houses in the time I was growing up. The majority of the time was in the very last house. We moved there when I was 12. But when I was finally allowed back up in the area, I went to see if the other houses were there. So the house previous to that one did burn down. But the house where I was actually born, that house is still there. So, but we were only there. I know where the house is, but I don't remember living there because I was too young. Then we moved from that house when I was like 4, and then from 4 to 12, that house is gone, and then the 12 to 18 when I moved out, that house is gone. So it was a nice neighborhood, nice, interesting community. A mix of many races and many socioeconomic levels, all in one, neighborhood, and we all knew each other, and it was a unique community in that sense. I hope the community comes back. Where my sister and I are going to rebuild my parents' house since we now own it. But it's hard to say, because I think my parents paid something like $20,000 for that house, and the last appraisal was like $2 million. So I don't know who can afford to buy houses at that price, but it's it's a kind of a privilege to we own it because we've inherited it. But we'll see how that turns out.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
What was it like watching these homes get lost? Because we were all following the news and stuff. What was it like watching that in real time?
Well, for me, because the family I grew up in they're not fundamentalists, but they're very conservative Christians, and growing up as a gay man in that environment was not easy. And so to survive that early on, I became emotionally detached from it. So I really didn't have and haven't had an emotional reaction to it, because I in order to survive that environment, I just bid my time until I was able to get out and actually feel safe, because I didn't feel safe growing up in that environment. I was that was the environment that really taught me that I was unacceptable, an abomination, sinful, going to hell. So, and I knew that, so in order to not buy into that and not, engage in, in the overt levels of self-loathing, I had to reject that belief system. Not easy to do in a house that is multi-generations of very conservative Christians. But, you do what you have to do to survive these things as kids. So it's interesting now that I don't miss the house, because the house was always a trigger. Because even though I've never moved that far away from it, but going back home, I would always have to, gird my loins to just be in that environment for the short time I spent there during holidays and birthday and Mother's and Father's Day's visit. But I could never stay there much longer than a couple hours at a time. Then I had to get out. So I don't miss the house. And any house that my sister and I rebuild will not be that house. So that trigger is now gone.
Wow. So it's, in a weird way, it was like cremating the trauma.
Oh, I couldn't have said that better.
Feel free to use that for any...
Yes, the trauma was cremated. And my parents were semi-hoarders anyways, and my sister and I always disagreed about what we were going to do with that mess, because we'd be visiting the house, and she would turn to me going, what are we going to do with all this stuff? And I said to her, those trucks that say "got junk" on the side, we're hiring a fleet of those. Because I said, I am not sorting this mess. I'm not going to do anything with it. It's just trash as far as I'm concerned. I don't care what value they place on it. She decided that she wanted to sort through it, and I said, okay, you're on your own. And she started, but then the fire happened and took care of the problem.
Talk about a sign that you shouldn't be doing something.
Yeah.
Like, I take stuff like that now where, like, oh, I forgot my poetry book. I wasn't supposed to perform that night. Stuff like that of, maybe it was for the best. Maybe there was something super emotionally triggering, or a tape your parents left behind that no one wanted to know existed.
Yeah. Maybe. we'll never know because it's gone, and I am not unhappy about the fact that all that stuff is no more.
Yeah, and you mentioned just the houses being of different value now.
Yeah.
That's a thing I've heard a lot from every part of LA. That's something my family's dealt with is, oh, we couldn't afford to live in the neighborhood we raised the kids in.
Yeah.
And one part of me, where are all these rich people coming from? Holy, like, who turned on the rich garden
Yeah.
hose of just... And that's another thing that I've been very in touch with the activists and organizers, more so early on after the fires, and it's heartbreaking out there because even if your house wasn't affected, the air and soil's all
Yeah.
toxic, and
Yeah.
there, because it's not as much of a affluent neighborhood, you're not getting the attention of the resources, and because it's a black and brown neighborhood, you're not going to get the attention or the resources.
Yeah.
And it was heartwarming seeing how many community members stepped up to help out, volunteer, contribute. I did a supply run out there, and as tragic as it was, we also shattered all these stereotypes about Los Angeles being a shallow place.
Oh yeah, and Los Angeles has never been shallow. Whenever there have been, I mean, I think what affects the fact that Los Angeles comes across as being distant and cold is because we're so spread out. It's impossible to get anywhere to really form community, and because not only is it so spread out that it takes forever to get anywhere, by the time you do that drive and come back home, the only thing you want to do is go to bed because you got to do it the next day. So it's hard to get to know your neighbors. But I mean, my father was the quintessential extrovert. He knew all the neighbors and everybody knew him, and he was always very helpful. And in any disaster, people came together. So I've never had the experience of not community. I mean, even if we didn't know each other very well, if there was a problem, my father was always there to help people, and people were always there to help us. So I think that stereotype is exaggerated, and maybe it exists in some pockets in some places, but certainly not in Alta Dena. Alta Dena was always a community-oriented type neighborhood, which I really appreciated that. But I think that's also because my father was a very community-oriented person. So he was always out there, always knew who people were, and if they needed help, they knew they could ask. So, and when my father, because he fell and shattered his skull, that's what killed him.
Holy crap!
And my poor mother, she has Alzheimer's, and she didn't know what to do, or she at that point didn't know how to dial a phone, because of her situation. So she knew to run to the neighbors. So the neighbors, were the ones who called 911 and got him to the hospital. But he, that was it for him. That happened in the Monday after Thanksgiving, 2023, and then and probably they should have resuscitated him because what came back was psychotic and paralyzed. So, and he lasted another 4 months after that. But had they, but my mother knew that there was help. She wasn't isolated, wasn't alone. So I'm glad that community, my neighbors were there, so that they took care of the situation as best they could.
Just surviving, it's stories like that, and when I'm doing historical research where I'm living's kind of the worst choice. So
Yeah.
sometimes. And I've had a few near-death experiences where I'm whoa, if that thing landed this way, I wouldn't be able to move from this part of my body down.
Yeah.
And just going I'm depressed now, and everything's more or less functional.
Yeah.
And that's heartwarming that your mother was able to rely on the neighbors.
Yeah.
And I've heard a lot of stories like that out of Alta Dena of just how everyone was connected and could turn to one another. I had a close family work friend who lived out there, and she lost everything. And it was like, oh, it's not a matter of just rebuilding, it's the way the system is. Could you even afford to be back there? And with the air and soil quality, could you?
Yeah.
And those are like,
yeah,
because material stuff aside and financial aside, it's like there is a small chance that it'll be health strings attached going back there.
Yeah.
And especially for people who are dealing with health issues, sensitivities, and more in the retiring age, is being in an area that has this, and that leaching out.
Yeah, very real concerns, because a lot of those houses were quite old. So they were made from materials that, people didn't know better, that back then. And now those materials are, toxic. We were talking asbestos and, I can't even think of what else is.
Oh yeah, the volunteers, there was like, when I did a distribution delivery, I had to have an P100 respirator.
Yeah.
And it was like, even then it was like, that's bare minimum, but seeing how many people couldn't afford to, or just didn't know, or didn't care, or were just like, the air's fine. Because that's another thing when you're dealing with like public health stuff like this, is convincing people in a way that doesn't feel like you're talking down to them. But that was another thing, is I was cringing every time I saw on the news the people in the wreckage of their home and they weren't masked up, because it's just...
Yeah, that's not good. Because it's one thing when it's contained.
It's another thing when you can't see it, and Yale University predicted thousands of deaths in the coming years.
Yeah, I'm sure. Because God knows what was in those houses.
Yeah,
so,
and then...
I don't know. I'm not that sensitive to stuff, and so... But even if you're not sensitive to it, it's going to affect you, because you're breathing it in. It's been let loose into the air, into the environment, into the soil. It's just all over the place. So we will see. We're going through that whole, toxicity review right now, but they're like 1,300 houses ahead of my parents. So I'm on that waiting list, and we'll see what happens when we get there.
Wow. Bringing it back to your family, you said they weren't fundamentalists, but they were Christian. What made you turn away from Christianity?
Someone asked me that question. Well, it was funny. It was the woman who runs the assisted living center where my mother is now living. The poor woman, also very Christian. I mean, I walked into the place and she has I love what she has. It's set up very nicely, and she has several television screens, all of them tuned to Christian, evangelical Christian, broadcasts. And I just had to laugh. And I don't know why she asked me what my religious practice was, and I told her that I'm Buddhist, and I'm Zen Buddhist, and so I do silent meditation. Her eyes glazed over, and like she'd never heard the word before. She didn't know what it was, and I had to explain what that was. And then she asked me that same question. Well, how? Because she's met my sister, and she knows the rest of my family's very much all the same religion. They're all Seventh-day Adventist. And she said, "How did you do that? And the rest of your family is..." And I said, "I don't know." So early on, I questioned everything. I think that was probably as a kid. I questioned everything. I did not accept everything on face value, and I was kind of an odd man out, because that's one thing that not only is it not part of the religion itself to question, because you don't question God, you don't question the Bible. The Bible is the truth, and you're supposed to just accept it on faith. And I was like, no. I insisted on questioning everything and found myself often in trouble in church school because they send us to parochial schools from first grade through 12th grade, and I didn't accept everything on face value, and they couldn't answer my questions. So, and not only did they not answer my questions, they just dismissed my questions, which just pissed me off even more. So, I thought, and I think they all thought I was going through some phase that I would get over and I'd come back to, the fold, whatever. No, and I just took my questions someplace else. Since they couldn't answer them, I would find someone who could, and I did. So I think that's probably ultimately resulted in my just, they call it losing my faith. I'm not sure that I ever had that much faith to lose.
What a great line. I can't lose what I never had.
Yeah. So, and I do remember having kind of an out of body experience when I was very young. I remember watching a special on PBS, and it was the special was on Angkor Wat, in Cambodia.
Yeah.
And
beautiful place.
Yeah, I've only seen pictures of it. I have to get there one of these days. So that's on my bucket list to do, is to see Angkor Wat before it dissolves into dust. So 13th century temple that probably had many religions, but one of them, for a while, it was a Buddhist temple. And I had this, just watching this special, I had this overwhelming feeling that I had been there. And it was like, yeah. And I have no belief in past lives, or who knows whether we had them or not. Been great if we did, great if we didn't. So but I did have that feeling. It was and I still remember that feeling, all these years later. So and that started my curiosity about that and other religions, and I started reading books and and other things about it, even though these books were certainly not in the library at the school where I went, but I was an avid reader and often went to the local library. The Alta Dena Public Library is a beautiful building. I don't even know if it's there anymore. I didn't go by that. I'll have to go back and see if it was destroyed. But I remember loving that library as a kid. Would ride my bike down to the library and spend hours reading. And so started reading, these sinful books. It would, Buddhism would have been considered idolatry by my family. And I suppose they, not just then, but they probably do now. But I couldn't do anything about it at the time, because even though I wanted out, there was no way out of that situation at that age. So I waited, and then once I got to college, then I started exploring. But I did. The biggest fight I had with my parents was about, I just refused to go to church anymore. I was like, and I basically told them, I don't believe in your God, I don't believe in your religion, I am not going to your church.
Punk rock. So punk rock, Arthur.
Yeah, they were like, boy, you will get out of bed and you will get dressed and you will go to church, and we will not take any more of this from you. And I just said no. They finally gave in. They finally gave up. They stopped trying to make me go to church.
You should have shown them a photo of a crust punk. It could be worse. It could be worse.
I'm sure at that age I have no idea. I didn't have any idea what that was. But
just like, because that's what I was saying to me. Like, I could have taken my mental illness and eccentricities a way worse direction.
Yeah. So it was around that same time, I'm hitting puberty. So I also know I'm gay. So, and that was not something that could be discussed.
Well, it's like, do you want the bad news or the bad news?
I know.
And just like, almost, you want to take it over and under, like, what are they going to be more mad about?
I know. Yeah, I had no idea what to do with that at that age. I just knew that that was not to be discussed.
It's like you have a hand grenade for each parent. You should have told one thing and one the other, and then wait for them to both go, I have terrible news for you.
Yes. I'm an atheist and I'm gay. Deal with that.
I'm just hearing the, like, Los Alamos shockwave of them wearing goggles.
Yeah. Yeah. Mind blown. So, yeah,
So, okay, so that kind of answers my next question of, like, when were you aware of your sexuality? So it just...
I knew then. My parents did not want to talk about sex, so they gave us books to read. I mean, fortunately, my sister and I were avid readers, and so they gave us books, and the book was very clear in defining. It was clear and very objectively non-judgmental in its presentation of homosexuality. And I remember reading it and going, "Oh fuck." I'm going, that's, why am I relating so much to what this description is? And but at the same time, you also know that it's not acceptable. That this is certainly by then this would have been early 70s. The homosexuality has now been removed from the ICD-9 code of diagnostic illnesses, but it's still not acceptable. It's there's no way everyone's not going to now embrace homosexuality as being normal just because the doctors have decided that it's no longer an illness. And this was a few years before the March on Washington. Was March on Washington 76? I think it was 1976. So, and especially in that environment, ultra conservative. And the school I'm going to at that time was blatantly homophobic, because there were other kids in the school who were obviously gay and were wearing, because they didn't allow people to wear earrings, but I remember this one guy showed up in these ginormous hoop earrings, and another guy became a go-go dancer at gay clubs, and they were summarily dismissed from school. So you saw them one day and they were all flamboyant and brave, I thought, and then the next day they were gone. Never to be seen again.
So you said late 60s, early 70s. What was it like when the Stonewall riot happened, when you caught word of that? Was it...
Well, I didn't know about Stonewall until after the March on Washington. So that was several years later. Because Stonewall, I would have been 8 or 9 years old when that happened. So completely clueless about that event until later. I mean, certainly I learned about its significance later, and also, it was many years after that I learned that not only, was there the riots, but this was led by black drag queens who basically took off their heels and threw down. I was like, you go girls. Thank you for saving us. I mean, they were my new saviors.
And that was what caught the cops off guard, was just like,
yeah,
they're fighting back. They're just like, they freaked out.
They're probably thinking they're gonna just, take these little effeminate things into custody.
And the second they fought back, they panicked and called in reinforcements.
These drag queens are killing us. I can just imagine. Let's see where this is at 8:20, so we got time. So yeah, I'm learning, like on the through the black market, because this was not allowed. These were not discussions that were had in my school or in my home, and certainly not in my church, my parents' church. So I had no, no one to talk to about this. It was, the loneliest time. But I was a pretty gritty kid. I was like, fuck the world. How dare you try to tell me that I should be some way. But I look back, I was not at all. I was fairly unfazed by people and their stupidity, because I knew they were stupid and that they had no clue about what was real. So, but I didn't. But it did. I mean, it did had take its toll on me, mentally, because I did start drinking a lot.
Ooh.
So, and it took my mother, my poor mother. It wasn't. It was after the third time I was brought home unconscious that she she finally realized maybe yeah. Then she came to me, and I'm drinking my favorite hangover my hangover recovery drink was root beer and milk.
See, like, I'll forgive the alcoholism. The root beer and milk is the more alarming thing to me.
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably the only thing because it was fizzy and soothing.
It was fizzy and a base.
Yeah. So weird, but and root beer floats, were it was kind of
see, when like they say stoners half-ass a meal.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of like something. It was like that.
Yeah.
Where it's like, it's sort of there. It's
Yeah.
a third of the way if you're like wartime trying to...
Yeah. Yeah, so I was having my root beer and milk. My mother walks in and says, maybe we could get you some help and to a therapist. And, you can choose the therapist as long as the therapist is a Christian. And I had a mouthful of root beer and milk when she said that, which just went... I was like, ah! I just laughed. I said... And I don't think I answered her. I just laughed. And I thought, she has no clue. She has no clue that their Christianity was the root of the problem. So a year or so after that, I'm out of the house. I moved out and moved in with what would have been my second boyfriend at that point. We moved in together, and I was a freshman in college and got to a therapist on campus, which was free, nice, and therapist walked me through my coming out process, and but I didn't come out to my parents. I came out to my friends at that age. That was a whole another drama, but yeah, thank God. I mean, that was the best thing that could have happened was just ultimate rejection of my parents' offer for help and finding help on my own. And the therapist was she knew. I mean, her name was Dolores. I remember that. She knew that I wanted to say that I was gay, but I had never said it out loud.
Ooh.
And she literally would not let me leave until I said it. And
Whoa.
And I kept saying, our hour is up. We're 15 minutes. We're now 30 minutes past. It's an hour and a half. It's time to go. And she goes, there's something you need to say. She would let me go. And I knew what she was doing. And I knew I needed to say it. And I remember how heart-wrenching that was. But once it was done, once you finally say it out loud, it's such a relief. And it's like, fuck, that hurt. It was like somebody reaching down your throat and just grabbing all of your entrails and pulling them out and saying and exposing you to the rest of the world. But she walked me through it, and I survived.
We're glad you did. That's the power of the word and saying it out loud. It's...
Yeah.
I feel like anything that really is rooted with our identity, yeah, those can be the hardest things to say sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you want to keep that close to you because it's safe down there. And
Yeah. I still look back at that and I'm like, how did I have 2 boyfriends without saying that I was gay? How is that possible? I don't know.
I'm sure there's plenty of
Yeah.
homophobic senators and congressmen who have
Yeah.
juggled that mentally of.
Yeah. I'm sure that's probably true.
So was alcohol and therapy the only ways you were coping at that time, or were you making art? Were you writing at all?
Well, fortunately, yes, I was right, because my first my and I was also designing, because I used my first major in college was fashion design. So I used to design and make clothes, and so I had this artistic, outlet that kept me going. Changed my major then to English with a journalism minor, so I started writing a lot and reading a lot. Still artistic. My third major change was to music. So I was always always in the arts, and so that was, and that really kept me. And the arts are hard, they're hard work, and you have to take a lot of classes, because the classes are worth like 1 unit, and so when I, there are many more units required to graduate with a degree in the arts than there are, like, business. So, and people, non-artists have no clue. Zero clue. So yeah, I remember this one business major. I can't remember what class we were in together, and one of the electives, and maybe was it French class, German class? It was one of the language classes. It was, and he asked, "What's your major?" I said, "Music." He goes, "Oh man, that's a kick-ass major, man." I was like, "Really? you want to come down and try this?" So I don't know, but I did the work. Loved college, especially after I finally found my the music. And I remember walking, because I was didn't know what to do. Was walking around campus and walked into the building with all the practice rooms, and just the cacophony of hearing all of these people practicing. The rooms are soundproof when you're inside of them, but you can hear everybody in the hallway.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, when I walked into that building, I knew, what took me so long? I'm home. So changed my major in music, and told my mother, and she says, "Well, don't give up your day job." Good advice. But I loved it. I thrived in the music department at Cal State Northridge. So loved that. Still have lifelong friends from that era of my life.
Wow. And I can imagine that for all the things you were struggling to put in the words, being able to just put it into sound was great.
Yeah.
Because there were no labels or weight or hate attached to the sounds.
No. Plus, it was a challenge, because I didn't come from. I'd had piano lessons as a kid, and then stopped, but then went back on my own when I was 16. Once I had a car, I could go. I found my own piano teacher, and I looked her up again recently. She's still alive after all these years. But I didn't come from having really great, pedigree, piano teachers. So I had a lot of technique to catch up on. But I really loved it, and so I was technically challenged, mentally challenged, artistically challenged. Okay, 8:25. Just running later and later with this. So I was completely absorbed into the music, and which also inspired me to write a lot of my own music at the time. So it was just a wonderful experience, expression, just everything that was the best. I still look back on those years as being the best years of my life.
Wow.
Yeah.
So did you start playing music as a kid, or was that just a college thing?
I started as a kid. The family was very musical, church music primarily. Um, my grandmother was a wonderful pianist and often played concerts. And she was my first piano teacher. So I started when I was like 4 or 5.
Wow.
And because I was interested in it, my parents paid for piano lessons. So I didn't. We had this one teacher, which old school. So this was back in those days. Corporal punishment was legal. So, and piano teachers often hit you with various objects.
I mean, give America a few more months. That might be mandated again soon.
Here we are again. Um, the good old days when America was great. So, and my sister didn't like it. So because she would, if you didn't have your hands in the right position, you'd get hit on your knuckles with a ruler or whatever it was, or your back was crooked, you get hit on the back. And so my sister would go home crying, and so she hated the teacher. So we were both studying from the same teacher. I kept going for a while, but then I quit too. That was around that same time, about 12, 8, 11, 12. But I kept playing, whereas my sister stopped entirely. So I played on my own, and taught myself some music at the time. So I became a little autodidactic with reading music and learning new pieces and writing my own stuff, and then went back to lessons on my own when I was 16. So I was always driven. Plus, I when I was in school, and because even though I hated the religion, I was still had to be there. I was in the touring chorale and the regular choir. I was in the touring band and the regular band. I played alto sax in high school. So I was always hyper involved in whatever arts were available.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I wanted to bring it back to the Buddhism. What drew you to that? We talked about what turned you away from Christianity. What turned you toward Buddhism as opposed to other faiths, other philosophies, other schools of thought?
Well, they say there are no accidents, but it seemed purely accidental. Between changing when I was about to drop my major drop my English major, and I hadn't decided what I wanted to do. I just knew I didn't want to be a journalist. I didn't want writing, and I knew that what I really wanted to do was, I loved writing poetry, but poetry there was no way to make money.
Yes.
Doing that. So,
and knowing so many poets, you know that even better now.
Yeah, I know. So I was like, okay, how am I gonna live? What am I gonna do? I walked into the Matador bookstore on campus at Cal State Northridge, and walked in it's in alphabetical order by author, and so I walked into the back end of it, and I saw this book, and the book was entitled "The Wisdom of Insecurity" by Alan Watts. I had no idea who Alan Watts was.
Ooh, Alan Watts is a personal favorite.
Yeah. Amazing writer, and I was totally attracted just by the title. Dove in and found, of course, Alan Watts is one of the preeminent writers that helped Buddhism make sense to the American Western mind, and I was hooked. I could not get enough of Alan Watts' books, so I'm sure I read all, if not almost all of them, and so that just sparked my interest. And I remember at that same time I saw an ad in the LA Weekly, which I'm sure is now gone. I don't think that publication is around anymore, for beginning meditation class in Zen Center, Los Angeles. So this would have been in 1981, 1982 that I saw this ad. And I'm reading Alan Watts, and Alan Watts led me to D.T. Suzuki and Kapleau, and I can't remember all the other authors. I mean, I was just kept I just kept going deeper and deeper and reading more and more about Buddhism because it made sense. It just resonated so deeply with me immediately, and I thought, this has got to be the best way to live. It just, it was not a religion. There was no requirement for me to believe in any sort of deity, no one to worship. It was about being in reality, and taking care of reality just as it is. And I thought, okay, why does it require all these books? This is so simple. Why don't people get this? Why aren't we all living this way? And and I finally stopped asking. I thought that was just, after a while, I thought, that's a stupid question. This is what you wanted. This is how you want to live. Let's just do this. So I kept reading, not knowing exactly what to do with it. It wasn't until 10 years later. So 1992, I graduated from college. I start teaching piano, and I have a whole bunch of piano students. Plus, I'm working part-time to maintain benefits and a livelihood. And by 10 years later, I am completely burned out. Have a whole bunch of students. I had like 60 students a week at that point. And I'm still working part-time to have health benefits. And I just hit a wall, and I thought, I can't do this anymore. Then the LA riots happened, and I quit the job. I was working in a music studio in Downey at the time, and I quit that job, and I pretty much stopped accepting new students, and so let my private studio just went away by attrition. As the students left, I didn't get any more, and just then upped my hours at the corporate job, which was Kaiser Permanente at that time. I was working in HR. Then it was just a clerk job, so it really wasn't career oriented. I just wanted it was just a job to help pay the bills. But then started focusing on that career, and then at the same time, I remembered that ad in LA Weekly about the meditation, and went back to the LA Weekly. Ad was still there. Called up and went to the beginning meditation class Labor Day weekend, 1992, and never left.
Wow. Yeah, I'm so used to the internet now, just thinking about flipping through the papers.
Oh yeah. We had no internet back then.
Yeah. I have a stack of relationship ads from 1992 that I found digging through some vintage clothes, and they are a constant source of humor for.
I bet they are. I can't imagine reading those now.
Oh, they're for couples across the sexuality spectrum.
Yeah.
So seeing what blindfolded Tinder was like. I remember when you were showing me meditation, it is like mental gymnastics.
Yeah.
And grounding yourself and finding that balance. So what made you want to stick with meditation, and what did you learn from it as you worked with your mind, as you did these mental gymnastics to go to deeper and longer lengths of meditation?
It's hard to, I'm sure that my answer to that question would have been different 30 years ago when I first started as it is now. When I first started, what I recall of my reason for sticking with it was how really much I loved the silence and the stillness of it. That felt natural, and I was at home immediately. Mm-hmm. So when I first went to the class, after giving us the initial instruction, they took us, and it was just kind of this open room. Then they took us into the main zendo, which was a converted house, and there were just all of these meditation cushions and a Buddhist altar in the center of the room, and was, just immaculately clean, and the floors were just highly polished. And I remember sitting down and going and thinking, I'm home. It was like the same feeling I had when I walked into the music building. I knew immediately that I was where I belonged. And so same feeling when I sat down in the Zendo at Zen Center Los Angeles. I knew I was home, and and at the same time I knew I was going to have to, it was going to be work, because it's not easy to do. Sitting for long periods of time is painful, both mentally and physically. Physically, your body wants to move. Mentally, your mind wants to escape.
Oh yeah, I have ADHD, and that's part of the reason why I didn't stick with it after he showed me. I'm just like, I don't know, and you felt the heavy blanket behind you, like the difficulty of staying still, and that's why I'm so intrigued, fascinated, and in admiration of people who can meditate.
Well, and I think anyone can meditate. You may not be able to meditate for very long, depending on your state of being, either physically or mentally, because some people can't sit for that long. And so I always encourage people, do what works. We don't try to do what the books say. Do what works. So if 2 minutes, 5 minutes is all you can do, then do the 2 to 5 minutes, and let that work for you. And if that manages to extend itself, great. If not, then keep doing that. I like sitting for long periods of time, and I don't have ADHD. So that stillness works for me, and it has a very practical application, because I can that kind of being present, the practice of being present for long periods of time worked in the job that I was doing, because I listened to people complain all day long. I was in HR for all those years, and being able to really be present for those people who felt that they had been harmed or wronged, even though for them that was their unique experience. For me, this was just another complaint, of the hours and hours of complaints I'd listened to. But I could really be, and I could feel myself feeling them, being with them. And so that's what I really appreciate about it, is that it had an immediate practical application. And I think that's really the only reason I stay now. When people ask me this question now, why do you do this? Point, because it works. I can sit still. I can be present. But it has taken the hard work of sitting and constantly bringing your mind back to the present, that it slowly becomes habituated. It becomes natural for you to be present and to pay attention to what's going on. You still have to do the work. It doesn't, if you don't get to a point where you stay that way. It's like with any musical instrument. Yes, you'll get technically better, but if you stop practicing, you'll lose some of that. So you probably never go back to never know, like not knowing, but so you'll never go back to the way you were before you started meditating. But if you want to continue to deepen that and be more consistent with it, you have to do the practice. And there's some days I can't sit for very long. I've got 5 minutes and my brain is like off and running. I'm like, okay, I give up. Or the cats are just all over me because they want to play, and I'd rather play with them. But for most days, the just taking that time out from the craziness of life, and what the day is insisting that I do. Just for me, it's me time. I can practice that being presence, and I feel it and see it emanate out into everything else that I do. I just taken 30 years to be able to say that because I don't think I could have said that back then. Then I liked it because it quieted my 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 constantly busy brain and got me out of just because I would just overthink stuff all the time. I was highly analytical and constantly organizing and very compartmentalized. Um, and the meditation has kind of broken down those compartmentalized. I still use that as a tool at times, but it's not quite so rigid as it was back then, and I'm not quite as concerned about analyzing things to death because that just it's a useless exercise for most things. It works. I can just apply where you apply those skills where they're really needed instead of having to do it with absolutely everything all the time. So I don't think it's changed me, other than maybe slowed me down. Maybe I'm just a little bit more quiet and patient than I was before I started meditating. But there's not another me that didn't do the meditation for me to actually make that comparison. So it's not a real comparison. Um, it's something I'm making up because there's no other way that I could be than the way I am. Whether I did the meditation or not, it's hard to know.
Interesting. And while we're in this subject, tell me about these tea ceremonies for people who aren't familiar, and because it's up there with like meditation of time, patience, routine.
Yeah. And I started doing Japanese tea ceremony a year after I started doing formal Zen practice. And Japanese the way of tea, Chado, comes out of the Zen school. It was reformed by a Zen monk, and today was his annual anniversary date of his death. So that's the ceremony I did all day today. Was the ceremony for Rikyu. For me, it's really because I need form and structure. I like form and structure, and there is nothing more form and structure than Japanese tea ceremony. It has got to be the epitome of all form and all structure because I think it's like practicing scales. You know the scales, and the only reason you practice them is because it's how you begin everything. It's how it centers you in the key. It allows the fingers to warm up and to become dexterous again. So it's very much grounds you in the reality. And so tea ceremony is kind of a funny. There's this kind of conundrum with tea ceremony because what people see of Japanese tea ceremony is the end result of a lot of work or the middle of a lot of work, because what they see is this very peaceful, calm, quiet, and very choreographed form of making a bowl of matcha tea. They don't see the days of shopping and preparation and cleaning and clearing out of the room, because the room is very spare. There's nothing in it except what you absolutely need. It's very minimal, which is that's kind of the reputation of Zen, is that it's minimalistic in that sense, and that's really kind of a false dichotomy, because people think that Zen is non-clutter and everything else is clutter. Zen is clutter. It's just it's arranged clutter, and I tell people who, and I usually reserve this description of tea ceremony for people I know who want to study. It's kind of as a cautionary tale, because I say that the peace and tranquility that you experience in the tea room when you're seeing tea ceremony, that peace and tranquility is wrought from the bowels of hell.
Elaborate further, like.
It's a lot of work.
Oh, that's what you're saying. Oh, it's like other art where it's like it looks good, but suffering produces the beauty.
Exactly. So that end result beauty got there by a lot of work and a lot of years of training, and really, so it's kind of, and you hear people, and I don't know why they do this, but even tea practitioners will apologize for the chaos. I'm like, what do you apologize for? This is how we get there. You've got to have the chaos to get to all that peace and tranquility. And the result is always beautiful, but you have to go through what all the many gyrations and work and preparation that it takes to create that. That does not happen by itself. So, and I think that's really what I appreciate about it more. And then you've got, I mean, that's just the middle part. Then you got to clean all that up after it's done. So you've got chaos to begin with. Then you have this. It's not a performance. It's a way of being. It's you are this peace and tranquility, and you're very present with your guests if you're hosting a tea ceremony. Then after they leave, you gotta then the work starts again because you have to clean. So, and that takes more days because the implements that are used are usually very, very old and need special care and can't just be thrown in the dishwasher. So it's got to be hand washed, left out to hard dry before you put them away. So there's this care and attention to all of these things because you want them to, they're made to last forever. These are not, someone showed at my house the other day with red Solo cups, and I almost, took their head off. It's like, what? Why? Why do they get these things out of my house? We're not contributing to the landfill with this. So, you take. It's about taking care of things, about taking care of your guests when you're at tea ceremony, about taking care of what it takes to create that atmosphere, and about taking care of it afterward. And cleaning things up and putting things away so that it's ready for the next time. And that's what Zen is all about. Zen is not only about, people think, oh, I want peace and tranquility, and that's why you do Zen. You're not, you will die trying to find peace and tranquility in Zen, because that's not what it does. You will find your way to reality. And reality is never the story that you tell about it. It's just what's immediately there and what's immediately present. And then what's next after you find that is taking care of it. That's the compassion part. That's the only reason you're there, is to take care of reality. Not for it to take care of you, because the reality is always there. But what are you going to do with it now that you've got this reality? Now that you're being present at that reality, what next? You're just going to sit there? No. You have a job to do. It is your job to take care of, and the vows that we take. The first vow: sentient beings are numberless. I vow to save them. And it's a weird way because there's nothing to save them from, because everything is perfect just as it is. But it's really about taking care of everything and everybody that comes into your realm of presence. That's including yourself. You have to take care of yourself in order to be able to take care of everybody else. You put your own oxygen mask on first if you are to assist others to breathe. So if you're not taking care of yourself, that's going to show up really quickly in doing Zazen. And the requirement will be, if I want to continue this, I'm going to have to do something about me. Then, once the me is in a better place, a healthier place, what shows up is everything else that needs to be taken care of. So, Zazen is not a passive act, it is a call to action. It is what you do if you want to very clearly and very effectively operate compassionately in the world. And that compassion is about being there for, in a way that that other person needs you to be, not the way you want them to be, but in what they need, and being present with that, which is very different than the way we operate, because we go through reality trying to force it into some mode of what we think it should be. Reality is just reality, and it's your job to take care of reality as it is. You're trying to force it into being something that it isn't is only going to make you miserable, and everybody else around you. But what the joy is getting rid of all that garbage, all the stories that you have about reality, taking care of reality just as it is, and taking care of the people in reality just as they are. And that's the hard part, because that requires that you take care of Donald J. Trump as he is.
Weird, it's killing me. Do not condone violence or assassination attempts of any means. Sorry, go on.
Well, could it be said that that's a way of taking care of it? I don't know. I leave that as a question.
This is the serious podcast. I will leave my solutions under the veil and protection of they are just jokes.
Yeah.
And in a different, more arena where I'm... So, thank you. That was very insightful, and I will be thinking about this long after as I re-listen to it. Kind of a turn of topics of what was your experience with the HIV AIDS epidemic?
Wow. Again, retrospectively, all of the close friends I had from that era are dead. Not all of them died of AIDS. Several of them did, but they're all gone. Which is an interesting. When I think about that, that is a difficult thing to realize and recognize. I am HIV positive, undetectable, and I was diagnosed before there was the cocktail. So at the time I was diagnosed, it was death sentence. So I prepared for my death. Then the cocktail arrives. No one knows whether it's going to work or not. So you see people just before the cocktail, AZT was causing more damage than it was helping people. Horrible drug. But it was the only thing that we had at the time. Thank God for Larry Kramer. Amazing act up. That whole, I mean, he had to be just loud and long to get people to pay attention, because no one wanted to pay attention. No one wanted anything to do with it. No one wanted to talk about it. It was all attributed to, and I remember there's this one experience. I went to a restaurant in West Hollywood, on Sunset Strip, and I walk in with, I can't remember who I was with. I was with someone, and I sat down at the table, and immediately this guy who must have thought that I couldn't hear him says, "I hear this disease is being brought here by these black homosexuals." And my friend looks up at me, and it was my friend Florence. Now I remember. And I said, I just looked at her and said, "I heard him. Let's just eat." Let him be in his ignorance. So that was kind of the. So it got it's stigmatized against against gay people, and then and where people could add their racism, they did. Um, so there was that, and even here in West, in West Hollywood, that was happening, and people were scared to death. Literally, people were very afraid. So there was just this element of fear that was running everybody at that time. And then I was diagnosed with it, and it was and again, the indoctrination I had as a child being raised in a Christian home came to bear in the strangest way, because I just started. I knew that I may have been exposed. Got drunk, had unprotected sex with this guy that I was very attracted to. Then he disappeared, and I didn't know what had happened, and I thought, uh-oh, what have I done? I go get tested, and around the same time, I started a new job. So I'm at my new job, and I didn't have a phone in my desk yet because they hadn't set up my whole computer and phone and all that stuff. So my doctor calls, and they transfer him to my neighbor's phone, my coworker's phone, who's right. His desk was right in the next cubicle next to mine. So he calls me over and says, "You have a call from Dr. Weinstein." I'm going, "Oh." Now, it didn't faze me that Dr. Weinstein had called me, because in addition to him being my doctor, we were also on a committee together. So I thought, it's the middle of the day. Why would he be calling me at work about? I figured he was calling about a work issue, about something to do with the committee. So I asked him, "Hey, Dr. Weinstein, how you doing?" And he goes, "Are you sitting?" I said, I was joking. So I said, "Sure." I wasn't. And I said, he said, "Your test came back. It's positive. I need you in my office in the next 20 minutes. And I said, "Okay." And I hung up the phone. I did not remember the drive. Somehow I drove from where I was to his office, which was about 20 minutes away. And it took me 10 years to remember. And I struggled with it. I'm going, I know I left that office, I went to my car, I got in and I drove, from point A to point B. And the next thing I remember is being in my doctor's office. I don't remember the drive. What was I thinking? What was going through my head, at that time? 10 years later, after that call, I remembered what I was thinking. And what I was thinking was, Bible text. The wages of sin is death. And then, once I remembered, I was like, okay, that's just fucked. that is what I thought at that time. But it is that's how insidious and pernicious that indoctrination is. That level of self-loathing is so deeply ingrained in people who are raised in that belief system. I was pissed at myself. Number one, for going unconscious, and but then once it came back to mind, it was like, okay, I need to take care of that. That is just wrong for me to have thought that of myself at that time. By then, 10 years later, cocktail's working, I'm undetectable, still taking a whole bunch of pills every day, and now we've gotten to the point where they've determined that if you're undetectable, you can no longer transmit the disease sexually. And the treatment is now, there's some treatments that are like twice a year, and mine is like every 3 months. So no more pills. Just a shot every 3 months, and it's manageable. I can remember thinking, will I survive long enough to see a cure for HIV? And now it seems possible.
Wow.
So yeah. we've come a long way. It's taken a long time and a lot of money. And had I not had the privilege of working in a job where that provided health care at relatively almost free, I don't know how people could afford that the medication. Um, Extremely expensive medication that it took us to get to this point. Um, I appreciate and recognize my privilege in this realm. I live in the first world, worked for a multi-billion-dollar corporation, and I had access to healthcare. That is not the case for so many people still, um, worldwide. So I am very lucky, very privileged, um, and I want to. I want this. I want to see the cure. That would be amazing. Um, for this to no longer be a problem. Does that answer your question?
It leaves me with more questions. Did you ever see the person you got it from again?
Yeah. He had come down. I could have sworn, this was a drunken episode. I could have sworn we had the conversation about whether or not each of us was positive, and apparently we had, because he remembered the conversation. But I asked the wrong question. The question is not whether or not he was positive, because he didn't know. The question is whether or not he had been tested. He hadn't. He did get tested later, which is why he disappeared, because he got tested as a result of becoming very, very ill. And also, in some cases, you come down with forms of psychosis that are directly related to AIDS. And I can't remember what the name of that was. There was a name for that, and that's what it came down. So he called me from the mental ward where he had been admitted, and asked me to come get him out. And at that point, he remembered my name, and for some reason he had my phone number. He didn't remember at that time that we had been together, and that he had exposed me. He did remember later because he recovered from that. So I saw, we never went out again, but certainly we stayed in touch through his death, because that was the beginning of the end for him. So I think it was less than a year after that phone call that he died.
Wow. So he got his mind back, but he was still losing his life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have any survivor's guilt from all of that? From going through that and from that time?
I guess I don't, because I'm not even sure what that means. Do I feel guilty? Do I think I should be dead?
Yeah.
That line is in my poem. When I talk about that era in my life, because the line is, I should be dead. Things happen the way they happen. Not everyone who was infected died. A lot of people did, but not everyone did. So when I think about it clinically, my doctor observed that because it took a while before they were able to measure the viral load. That was not possible when I was first infected, but eventually they got there. He observed that my body was keeping the viral load at very low levels all by itself. So for the first 6 years, I was not on any medication at all. he didn't want to start me on anything because I think he understood the AZT was the worst thing you could do. So, and even after the cocktail became available, he still didn't give it to me until my body started failing. So once the T cells, were very low and the viral load went up, then he started me on the medication. But I was fine. I was healthy for those 6 years. And then after I started taking the medication, my body responded immediately. I was undetectable within a couple of months after taking the medication. And it had been there, and that's 25 years ago. So, certainly, when I compare what I went through to what I saw some of my friends go through, I do feel, sympathy and empathy for them. But it's hard for me to, but I never experienced it. So there's not, it's not direct. So there's not a direct, I think I've never thought to myself, I should be dead. I've always known that I could be dead, that was a possibility. But it was also possible because I maintained my reading about the disease. There are people who have been able to I guess there are a couple of cases in the world where people have actually completely gotten rid of it. Their body's gotten rid of it by itself. So I think our bodies have the capacity to do that, and it's always been a question for me: will I be the one that survives either to experience being healed from this completely, or will my body take care of it by itself? So I can't say that I feel guilty about being alive. I can say that I feel bad that my friends are gone. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Wow. It's a great answer to the question. And just one more to wrap it up on a happier note. I know Buddhism gets a lot of exaggeration and eccentricity added to it in pop culture. What's your favorite depiction of a Buddhist you've seen in film or TV? Just a movie or TV character that you felt portrayed it well for what it is.
The Matrix.
Wow. Okay, go on.
And you're right. I mean, there are these rather bizarre caricatures of what a Buddha should be like. But what's Keanu Reeves' character's name?
I'm drawing a blank on.
I am too. I've watched the movie a dozen times. Love that movie. Love all three. Now four. There are four in the movies. Him being, taken out of his battery tube, as I call it, and experiencing reality for the first time, is what Zazen does. So, and the reality that you experience isn't goodness and light. It's real. It's hard. It's work. And at the same time, that the garbage they're throwing at you, those bullets, are not real.
Oof.
So yeah, when I think of a character that for me depicts what Buddhism or what Zazen has done for me, it's The Matrix. So I love the movie. Not a Keanu Reeves fan from his other movies, but certainly love that movie. Movies, all of them.
Surprising answer. And just to wrap up, I'm going to go through a quick, just for the people curious of some of the things we've talked about.
Yeah.
So, Buddhism originated in India between the mid-6th and mid-4th centuries BCE. So for those bad with centuries, that's 2,400 to 2,600 years ago. Buddhism came to Japan around 500 CE, that's roughly 1,500 years ago, and 200 years later, during the Nara period of Japan, the government sponsored Buddhism. On June 28th, 1969, the Stonewall Riot happened in Greenwich Village, New York City. On to the mental health in the LGBTQ2IA+ community. Suicide is the second leading cause of death amongst young people. Young people in the LGBTQ community are 4 times more likely to think about, plan, and attempt suicide. That's an estimated suicide attempt every 45 seconds, according to the Trevor Project. HIV and AIDS. HIV is a virus that causes AIDS. AIDS is a condition that seriously damages the immune system. HIV first jumped from chimps to humans sometime before 1931. By the 80s, a more aggressive strain of HIV started spreading and caused the widespread suffering we're more familiar with today since the 80s. According to the World Health Organization, as of 2023 is when these stats are from, around 88.4 million people have been killed by HIV. 42.3 million people are impacted by it, while there's 39.9 million people living with HIV. So, even though there are people who don't have it, there's still many lives that are impacted by it.
Yeah.
Probably the loved ones and the communities.
Yeah.
So.
And there are still people who are getting sick and dying of it.
Yeah.
So it's still very serious.
Yeah, and when I was doing this research, these were rounded out estimates. There's still an over or under, and that you just have, and this is just when they averaged out the under and the over, because it still could be way higher. Just as far as a lot of these people who are in these more heavily impacted regions are more remote, harder to get access to, and but that's all the questions I have. That's all the timeline. Arthur, where can people find you online?
I guess
you're not trying to shamelessly self-promote like most of the artists on here?
I'm not.
Wow.
I know.
Cool. This is everyone. Arthur Kennedy, thank you so much for joining us here. Thank you for sharing.
My pleasure. Thank you for this experience. Another first for me.
You've been listening to It's Killing Me. I'm Shane Kenny Comedy on all social media. I'll catch you on the next one. Thank you.